So the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's one version of it, but something similar exists in almost every culture, language, religion around the world. Maybe that's why so many of us know it, and so many of us believe in it. I believed in it too, until a series of enlightening and sometimes devastating realizations occurred in my own career that made me see otherwise. Before I dive into this, though, I'll tell you, I'm not going to suggest that you should be doing harm to other people, or that you should get rid of the idea of having some basic respect for your fellow human. I am, though, saying this rule is wrong. And by trying to live up to it in our workplaces, we are making work more difficult for ourselves, as leaders, as colleagues, and as teams. And that because of that, we are not achieving as much as we could in our own careers, and our organizations are not achieving as much as they could. Now again, that sounds like a lot of negativity around something that is so popular, we've come to call it the golden rule. But in fact, I'm going to try to show you a few options, a few different ways to approach relationships. So for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been working as an executive coach. I've been helping leaders manage their organizations, their government departments, their teams of people. And it's been partly through working with those leaders that I've come to realize that this golden rule is wrong. So recently, I was asked to lead a workshop with a group of leaders, and the host introduced me as a leadership guru who had been a great leader and was now sharing that with other people. And I cringed. And I don't mean one of those, ugh. I mean one of those slap your hand to your mouth kind of, oh my God, kind of cringes. Not because that was unkind or ungenerous, obviously quite the contrary. It's because it simply wasn't true. I hadn't been that great leader. And it was partly because of the golden rule. And so I had to live being that leader for a long time before I realized that, and before I realized the golden rule was wrong. So for the last 20 years before that, I was a senior executive. I was working with and contributing a fair bit to the federal government, saw some good domestic successes, international successes, ultimately the creation of a new national museum. For most of those 20 years, I was on the rise. I was leading teams of people. I was giving advice to elected leaders at the highest levels of our government, managing budgets worth millions of dollars and having an impact on people's lives. So what was the problem? The problem was that I, like many successful leaders, was driven by perfection. I was driven by a need to be right. I was driven by a need to look good and to make sure that people around me were proud of my success. And ultimately, I was driven by the need to achieve some honorable goals. I assumed that's what everyone around me was driven by as well. Many of us assume that other people, see the world the way we do. We make assumptions that they are making similar assumptions, similar judgments as we are. That is so innately human to assume that other people are making similar assumptions and judgments that most of us don't even realize we're making those assumptions, let alone that those assumptions could be terribly wrong. So despite some great mentors along the way, I was determined to live by the golden rule. I was determined to help you be perfect. I was determined to help you be right, to achieve good things, to make our bosses proud, to meet our deadlines, to deliver the goods. As you can imagine, eventually, that didn't end well. It wasn't pretty. We went our separate ways, and my career took a dramatic turn. I suppose it was obvious why it wasn't helpful for me to be applying that golden rule to other people. I had to lighten up on myself a lot first, and I had to recognize that other people weren't seeing the world the same way I was. But what if you're not one of those blustering, frustrated bosses? What if you're the sociable, outgoing, chit-chatty type of person? What if you're the caring leader who wants to make sure everyone on the team is cared for and that everyone feels comfortable? What if you're that person who prefers to be left alone, focus on the details, make up some spreadsheets and some policies so other people have an easier time. You may be thinking, as I was talking about those folks, about someone in your own workplace, that social networker, that caring manager, that detail-focused expert. You may even be thinking, well, those things sound pretty good. That might be useful in my workplace. What we often don't realize is that good characteristics, when taken too far, become bad characteristics. And what even more of us tend not to realize is that those characteristics that you may have been thinking would be really useful, really helpful, kind of motivating in your own workplace, could well be the very same characteristics that someone else finds exhausting, demotivating, uninspiring. That person might be sitting in the seat right beside you right now. Different people see the world differently than you do. So one of the questions that I ask a lot of my clients when they start working with me is, what do you love about your job? I often ask most of them, what do you not like about your job? What do you kind of hate? This is what I hear from most of my clients about what they love about their job. I love the constant change, never knowing what comes next, a new challenge every day. Here's what I hear from some people about what they hate about their work. I hate the constant change, never knowing what comes next. Oh, a new challenge every day. So imagine for a moment one of those first people who loves change, thrives on new things, trying to use the golden rule to motivate and encourage and interact with someone who really prefers the status quo. They like to keep things the same. You can probably all think of a couple people who work together, speak the same language, who just don't think the same way. When folks like this try to apply the golden rule to each other, challenges erupt. So imagine if you're one of those amiable, chatty, sociable, outgoing types in the office. And you're trying to use the golden rule to engage with someone else in your office. And I'm going to generalize here, but big generalization. But let's say you're trying to build a better rapport with the bookkeeper or the computer software programmer. And you figure you'll bring your sunny, bright, chit-chatty, networking personality to them to try to build a rapport. You may not be motivating them with that approach. In fact, you may be pushing them right over the edge. And so what these folks need to start to do is to pick up on each other's cues before it gets to that point. That means paying attention to how the other person sees the world, how they're making their assumptions, their judgments. And that's called emotional intelligence, and it is contrary to the golden rule. In fact, I would say it's completely opposite to the golden rule. Okay, it means engaging with them the way they need you to, regardless of the way you want to engage or you need to engage. It means adapting a little bit to each other's behavior type. So this idea of behavior type is knowing your own behavior type, your motivators, your stressors, and then knowing the other person's behavior type, their motivators, their stressors, and adapting a little bit. It doesn't mean we all have to wholesale change, but it means recognizing and adapting to each other. So this idea of behavior types, it was first developed by a fellow named William Moulton Marston, ages ago. William Moulton Marston was a pretty interesting guy. He was very accomplished. He was both a lawyer and a psychologist. He invented the world's first lie detector polygraph test, which is pretty much the same one we use today. He wrote self-help books long before the era of Dr. Oz, about 100 years before. He lived most of his adult life in a polyamorous relationship, different, and he invented Wonder Woman. Seriously, he created Wonder Woman. But I think the most important thing he did was develop this idea, this theory of human behavior profiles. Well, other than maybe Wonder Woman, maybe second most important thing he did. And I'm hoping to show you how those behavior profiles and that idea that he developed are going to be very exciting to help us adapt how we build our relationships. And I realize, I'm competing with Wonder Woman for your attention on that, but we're going to try. Okay, there are many assessment tools out there right now, 100 years later, that are based entirely on the work of William Moulton Marston, and some of them are quite amazing. But what if you're not in a situation where you feel like you can say to your colleague beside you, hey, let's all go get our behavior profiles assessed so we can learn to work well together. Or, let's all go do an everything disc workshop so that we can build our teamwork together. And people look at you strangely. I don't know what that is. You can start making changes right now in how you interact with people by ditching the golden rule, and we're going to walk through just a couple of those ideas right now, right here. So, how do you know how to treat people, if not how you want to be treated? Well, the first thing you do is we start paying attention to individuals. No more generalizing, no more grouping. We pay attention to each individual person. Okay, next, we start asking questions of people. We become infinitely curious about them. And if you find that difficult, especially with someone maybe you're having trouble building a relationship with, try starting some of your sentences with things like, I'm really curious about, or I'd love to know more about. It almost forces you to become curious in your conversation, and that will help you get to know the person and figure them out. Next, we listen to their words and to their tone. So Stephen Covey, famous author of the 7 Habits series of books, he once said, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So we start listening with the intent to understand. Next, if you're leading a team of people, and I didn't go backwards, I'm back at this again. If you're leading a team of people, you adapt your leadership style to each of them individually. So you lead the team, but again, we come back to engaging individually. It means adapting your style to each one, which is difficult, but the return on investment will be huge for you. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me for a minute. Close your eyes and just imagine someone you would like to have a better relationship with. Maybe it's someone who scares you. Maybe it's someone who frustrates you. Maybe it's that guy at work who just seems to always push your buttons. Okay, do you all have someone in mind you'd like to think about? Go ahead and open your eyes. Let's ask ourselves a few questions about that person, okay? How quickly do they respond to a question, typically? Do they dive right in with an answer when they're asked a question? Or do they tend to be contemplative and reflective when asked a question? If they are more the dive in and answer type, are you able to speed up and feel their urgency a little bit when you're interacting with them? If they're the more reflective, contemplative type, are you able to dial it back a bit and allow them time to reflect before you jump in ahead of them with answers? Okay, secondly, how explicit are they about how other people will feel and how other people will be affected by what they say and do? If they tend to be the type to jump right to a goal, they're pushing hard to reach a goal, not really aware of how other people will be affected, are you able to get to your goal quickly when you talk to them and focus less on the process of getting to your goal? Whereas if they're the type who are more reflective about the people around them and thinking about how others are going to be affected, are you engaging them on that? Are you able to draw out of them what their concerns might be so that they can feel more comfortable before you get down to business? Does a change of plans excite them or frustrate them? So imagine we're talking about the person you're thinking about. Picture for a moment that you've organized a conference call at 3 o'clock this afternoon with a group of colleagues, and someone says, hey, we're all here today, why don't we just meet over lunch in the boardroom and talk about it then? Is the person you're thinking about going to get a little bit crazy and a little bit frustrated by that last minute change of plans? Or are they going to dive in and say, hey, great idea, perfect opportunity for all of us to chat? Yeah, different types of people, right? Different people see the world differently. Are they factual, or do they tend to be storytellers? And what I mean by that, I saw a great example online one time. If I show them this apple, and I asked your person, can you describe the apple for me? Are they likely to say, well, it's a fruit, it's round, it's red, it's got a stem, done? Or would your person just as possibly see this picture and say, oh, that reminds me of the apples on my grandma's farm. She used to make apple pies out of them. It smelled so good. The sugar, the cinnamon, the pastry, and those fresh apples, they taste amazing. Oh, it's almost like I'm back there right now as we're talking. If they're more of the storytelling type, they may need you to slow down a little and smell the roses with them, or in this case, smell the apple pie with them, before you continue on with your own priorities and your own goals in the conversation. So let me give a quick example of all this. One of my clients is a particularly good leader. Frankly, I think most of my clients are pretty good leaders. This one in particular is really sociable, outgoing, very much concerned with making sure everybody's comfortable, everyone feels valued in the organization. We were leading a workshop for a group of leaders recently, she was attending, and we asked them to tell us one thing, the best thing they do to motivate their teams. So everybody kind of thought about it, came up with something. And then we asked them to think about how might that thing demotivate someone on your team? And that's a tough question because it means you're now looking at the world from a different perspective. And this particularly good leader said, I don't think I can do that with mine. Mine kind of applies to everybody. Her example was to recognize people publicly in the group when they do good things so that they feel the praise. And that's when one of her colleagues who was at the workshop with a little prompting from a step forward and said how she feels about public recognition. Embarrassed. Singled out unnecessarily. It makes me feel like I'm not part of the team anymore. I would much rather be recognized individually, one-on-one, sincerely, when I've done something really well. So you see, even when it seems obvious, there may be some other person's perspective that is helpful to think about. So interacting with others in a way that they need you to, in a way that they see the world, regardless, or at least to some degree, regardless of how you're seeing the world, can change all of our relationships. Imagine how that could change your workplace. Imagine how it could change your volunteer roles. Imagine how it could change your home life. Now imagine everyone is doing that for you, and you're doing it for everyone else. Saying the golden rule is wrong is counterintuitive, but it's my proposal that counterintuitive thinking can change our world. Thank you.